Members, we have already formed a quorum, so let's call the meeting to order and invite the administration's team to join us.
保重，好似聽日仲凍啲喎，好似話，唔該晒。好，歡迎。
Welcome. I would like to introduce the team from the administration to you. First of all, from the Financial Services and the Treasury Bureau, Ms. Sarah Che, PAS, Mr. Keith Lui, Executive Director, Supervision of Markets Division, and Mr. Rico Leung, Senior Director, Supervision of Markets Division from the SFC, and then Ms. Kitty Lai from the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. Let's come to the point directly. Last time we said that we would like to have someone from the Hong Kong Monetary Authority so as to comment on the large open position reporting requirements. We were concerned about the USD CNH futures contract. For any single trader, the limit would be 2,000 open positions, 5 business days. In other words, $200 million. Let's take a look of a worst-case scenario. Say, for example, on the very last day, delivery is scheduled. And then, say, for example, perhaps we have got 100 traders, 50 of them are having 2,000 contracts in the positive. Another 50 have to deliver RMB. In other words, it may happen that all out of a sudden, on that particular day, among the 700 million 700 billion RMB, a lot of money has to be withdrawn, so it will be quite substantial. For the Hong Kong FE and the SFC, when the consultation was carried out, did you analyze such a phenomenon, and would there be an impact on any parties? Ms. Lai, would you like to give us a reply? We looked at the limit or the level at 2,000 contracts. What we had in mind was the ability of the market to cope with it. For individual investors, if they chose not to close it, then they had to deliver in kind. They have already sold RMB. If they would like to deliver in kind, and if they haven't got RMB, then they have to go out to the market to look for the RMB. For an individual investor, for 2,000 contracts, it means $200 million worth RMB would be needed. For the spot market, for RMB against USD, it would be 2 to 3 billion a day as far as the turnover is concerned. I don't think it would cause a problem and it would not have an impact. Perhaps, as the chair has suggested, maybe many investors have already sold it and they have already come to the point to deliver it. While they don't have it, this is quite rare. For the experience in overseas futures markets, most of the futures contracts do not involve delivery on the day of expiry. Usually the positions have been closed in advance. So for those who choose to deliver on the expiry date, usually they have got RMB in hand. If such a rare scenario does happen, it means that the investor has to go to the market to look for the RMB. So either they try to buy it or they go to the market to borrow the RMB. For them to buy the RMB, the exchange rate may be higher, and then for those having RMB at a higher rate, they may want to sell it. Now we are talking about 720 billion RMB, and it is still growing. So generally speaking, we believe that there is a sufficient supply of RMB to the investors. In a very extreme situation, that is a lot of deliveries would be needed, then I think the exchange would also remind the relevant brokers as well as the position holders that they need to get ready well in advance for the delivery, and they shouldn't wait until the last moment to deal with it. That's all I want to say for the time being. Mr. Lui, the Hong Kong MA's colleague, has already said that there is an adjustment mechanism. If the RMB is being exchanged at a high rate, then people will come out to supply the RMB to the market. We have to look at the level of open positions from September up to now. Usually we have less than 200 contracts that are still open. So the regulator and the exchange will monitor it. If the trend is that the open positions are still large in number, now for the figure of 2,000, it is a statutory limit. The exchange can still restrict it further, or it can impose a higher margin so as to discourage the holding of such a large number of open positions. So there are ways to deal with it. Mr. Chang, we have futures for US dollars and RMB. I think the purpose is to act as a tool in speculation, or is it for trade settlement? So what is the purpose of having this kind of futures contracts between US dollars and RMB, for speculation or for trade settlement? When it was launched by the exchange, the end users, like the enterprises, like smaller size enterprises, were also in mind. In fact, the exchange market talks about a huge sum of money. The size is usually huge. Now here we are talking about 100,000 US dollars. In other words, it may suit the needs of different kinds of investors, including some SMEs, if they want to avoid the risk of RMB, then they can use this tool, this product, for risk management. Now you're talking about 100,000 US dollars. In other words, small investors may also take part. In other words, on the date of settlement, now there may be a lot of fluctuations. In other words, I'm afraid that there may be problems of manipulating the market for US dollars against RMB. Now 2,000 contracts, maybe we're talking about 2,000 contracts in 500 small investors, retail investors, and then the prices may fluctuate, and then the risk may increase. So I want to know how you're going to regulate this problem. When we design a product, we won't confine it to particular groups of investors. I would only say that this is suitable for the majority of the investors. If you say that retail or small investors are interested, if they're interested in exchange, foreign exchange other than futures, they may also approach banks for this area. Investors have to know that if they are interested in RMB, they need to know about the risk in the RMB market. And then Yes, for the exchange rate of the RMB, we know that relatively speaking, the fluctuation is within a smaller range. So the risk is sort of confined. Now, perhaps people are trying to see whether it is an active market, whether it is of interest to them. So the daily turnover is 500 contracts only. Now, for the futures market, 500 is not a big it's not a large number. So probably many people are still waiting and adopting a wait-and-see attitude. As to the unusual developments, as the Hong Kong MA and myself have said, the exchange as well as the market, as well as the regulator, have measures to deal with it. It is quite transparent. The number of positions haven't been closed. All of them are still available on a daily basis. So quite like the Hang Seng Index, you need to watch it and you need to bear in mind the risk that you can bear before you adjust your positions. Well, it's a matter of risk management. You do have a mechanism, but can you prevent manipulation? RMB currently in Hong Kong is not large in the quantity. I'm afraid that there may be some people who would like to speculate and manipulate the exchange rate in the market. So I want to know whether there are ways to safeguard the interests of the small investors. Well, in the case of manipulation in the market, ourselves and also the future exchange will watch the developments. We'll try to see if there is any suspicion of manipulation. This applies to all products, not just this one. So we do monitor the possibility of manipulation, and we'll try to see whether it is something normal or not. Say, for example, all out of a sudden there are sudden changes, then we'll look at the external environment to see whether the trading is justified. Say, for example, there may be news causing panic. So it may not be a matter of manipulation, it's just a matter of people getting panicky. So the SFC and the exchange would be monitoring such developments. We'll try to see whether there is any emergency, and the margin can be enhanced by the exchange so as to make sure that the market will be as steady as possible. Mr. Tong, there is a point that I don't quite understand. Just now, it seemed to me that the administration agreed with the chair that the scenario they outlined might happen, but then they were saying that it was not too likely, and judging that the small volume of turnover, they thought that your scenario might not actually materialize. I'm saying if we lower the upper limit, we can reduce the risk. Would you agree with me, and why haven't you considered this? That's my first question. My second question is that, say, for example, many people are trying to get the RMB in the spot market to close the positions. Then the first to bear the brunt will be the smaller investors. Such clients will bear the brunt, and then if everybody is trying to fight for it to close the positions, then it means that there will be a lot of defaults as far as the contracts are concerned. So I want to know about the impact on Hong Kong's status as a financial center. If a lot of medium or small investors become getting difficulties in closing the positions, what would be the consequences? First of all, the level. Shouldn't you lower it to make it safer? Well, last time we said that when we decided on the limit, when we decided on the level, we said that if the level was set at too low a figure, then the amount of RMB would be too small in quantity, say for example lowered from 2,000 to 200. No, make it 1,000 for example, that's more reasonable. Well, I think since the first meeting we have been emphasizing that we are dealing with two new products and it's a new market. I think the broad principle has always been like this. We balance the market development vis-a-vis risk management. Now we're talking about a statutory limit, a statutory ceiling. And if you want to increase it, it will take at least a few months' time. So when it comes to the statutory upper limit, we have to bear in mind the needs for market development. Mr. Lui has already said that if the market develops in such a way that we find the level too high, that is the risk too high, I think, Ms. Chair, you should think in a contrary way. Well, currently the daily volume is 500. For any single trader in the last 5 days, I don't think you need to give it 2,000. I think you should start with 1,000 or 800 or 500. And then if you see that now, if we have 1,400 billion renminbi in Hong Kong instead of the smaller figure, then you can enhance the level, and then you use 3 months' time to do the legislative work to change it, instead of starting with 2,000 and allowing the possibility of having a risky situation.
So we do not want to remedy after it bursts, right? Well, I reiterated just now that we wanted to strike a balance. Well, the SFC has been explaining since the last meeting, and this time around we have officers from Hong Kong MA. We actually have studied a lot of data, a lot of overseas experiences. When it comes to physical delivery contracts, it seems that there are not that many of them. Of course, we have to be prepared for all sorts of scenarios. Now, if in case it happens, and the Hong Kong Exchange can revise its relevant regulations immediately so that the relevant levels can be set. And we can do that very fast. And if in the future development we discover that the risks are higher than what we expected, we will definitely lower the statutory upper limit. And for the financial market, actually is developing very rapidly. And we can look at it from another angle. Because we are just talking about a few months, so we're just talking several hundred of them. So you are jumping from 0 to 500, and it's for all traders. So for any single trader, do you want to allow him to hold 2,000? Well, maybe she should answer the second question first, and that would affect the assessment of the risks. Now, if small investors are not able to find spots, and there will be default. So what will be happening? Now, if somebody are holding positions and they cannot find RMB, as the Hong Kong MA said just now, what is the picture of the foreign exchange market? Actually, it's getting bigger and bigger. And for example, a year ago when we conducted this study, we were talking to the Hong Kong MA. At that time, the foreign exchange spot market for RMB, the amount was about 1 to 2 billion only. And after a year or so, now it's up to 3 billion. So the trend is like this, it's going upwards. So the market is more and more mature. That is the offshore RMB market outside China. Just now my colleague told you that for the Hong Kong RMB pool is also getting bigger. So when we look at this kind of development, actually it's pretty positive. The market, or the small investors or big investors, they can make use of market forces to deal with the issues they encounter. So what you're saying that is this won't happen? The possibility is not that high. Now, if the market is shrinking, then we should think whether 2,000 would be appropriate. Well, let us be prudent. We should not start from 2,000 and think of lowering in the future. Maybe we should start with 1,000. And then you look at the daily transaction. Now, for example, you are talking about 700 billion. And maybe a large amount is locked inside. So it's not like you can always come up with tens of billions of RMBs. So you should be prudent in the initial stage. Now, if you're saying that 1,000 would limit the development of the market, maybe this will only happen after 2 years. So at that time, you can change. Well, Chairman, I would like to supplement. When we look at the CNH futures contract, actually at the last meeting we also mentioned this. It's not just about the Hong Kong exchange. For the Chicago Board options exchange, they also have the same product. So when we look at the position limit, actually we think that 2,000 is appropriate. Well, you may think that 2,000 are too much, or you want to be more conservative and want to set it at 1,000. For Hong Kong investors or overseas investors, if they think the limit in the Hong Kong market is too restrictive, then they would go to the Chicago exchange. And then we would lack information to monitor. So we should set a level which will satisfy the needs of the market. And of course, the risks must be under control. Then we will get more monitoring data. When we set it at 2,000, we mentioned last time that we have already talked to the market stakeholders. And for this product, we, of course, hope the market participants can make use of it for hedging. And if we set it at 2,000, that is $200 million that would suit their needs. When we look at the data for CNH futures contract, it was launched last September, and up to now we have conducted some surveys, and about 10% are used for investment by small investors, and about 50% or 60% is used by banks, and for 30% they are used by institutional investors. So we have asked them why are they buying CNH futures contract. They think that it is for hedging against the risk of RMB exchange. So before the contract was introduced, we didn't know whether it would be very successful or how fast it would grow. So we were just looking at the market data and the need of the market at that moment, and then we set a level that was appropriate. And of course, in the future, we will look at the market situation, and then it can be adjusted either upwards or downwards. Now, if we look at the design of the product, it has a characteristic. Now, because we require physical delivery, so the investor would have to think, that is how he can find the relevant RMB. It's not just you can make a huge investment. You have to find enough RMB, and the broker would have to allow you to do that before you can do so. So for this product, we hope that the enterprises can have one more way for hedging. Well, he would think that because in the future he will get this RMB, so now he can do hedging. So if he really hedged, then he can do the delivery at the appropriate time. So it would not cause the problems you mentioned just now. Now, if he's really speculating, then he really has to think twice. This is not the most ideal way. Mr. Chang, now what's the use of this CNH futures contract? The SFC always talked about the Chicago Board options exchange. Actually, this is a kind of misleading, because for overseas markets, it's fund versus fund. And in Hong Kong, it's fund versus small investors. So the operations are different. We have to look at our local characteristics. Mr. Chung, he said that there are just 10% small investors and 60% are bankers or banks and 30% institutional investors and 10%, you said volume, right? That is the transaction amount. Only small investors only account for 10%. Now this has not been launched officially. Now, many small investors still do not know about this. Now, RMB is very popular, so I'm sure many small investors will be interested in this product. So that's why I am worried about market manipulation. So we shouldn't just be looking at Chicago. They do not have many small investors buying RMB. There is always fund versus fund. So I am just worried about whether enough protection is afforded to small investors. And we only have 500 and 600 billion, actually 720 billion. So would a proportion be more appropriate in the future? Well, just now Mr. Leung said that, what is CME? How many? CME now is set at 2,000. Now, supposedly, if we lower it to 1,000, then some investors may choose to go to Chicago because they do not have so many restrictions as we do. Even though it's more than 1,000, you can go to CME because they cannot do it here. And you say that you will have less regulatory data. And we are worried about speculation and manipulation, and that may cause unfairness. And if eventually we do less business, that is the only risk, right? Because we do not want to take other risks. Now, for big investors, yes, if they choose to go elsewhere, of course, that will affect the development of the market. If in the last few days they hold more than 1,000, they cannot do it. They cannot apply for exemption. And then they will go to Chicago to play with other big players. However, what do we have instead? The possibility of risk-taking would be lowered. And you're talking about you will have less regulatory data. Now, if the big players all go there, they go hedging in Chicago or whatever. So it doesn't matter that we have less regulatory data, right? What's the point? Or maybe I can explain more clearly. For the Chicago products, they have to do physical delivery, and that's actually done in Hong Kong. So if anything happens, it will also affect Hong Kong's market. Mr. Chung, actually it's like this. The physical delivery is actually done in Hong Kong. So I think the stability is higher. Here I'm always worried about small investors. What he means is that for the contracts in Chicago, and if you do buy your contracts in Chicago, eventually the physical delivery will take place in Hong Kong. So they cannot go elsewhere. They have to come back to Hong Kong. If that is the case, then they do not have to report to us. And eventually, on the settling day, we will also have to take risk. However, if it's like that, then we will not be prepared for any shortage of RMB. Of course, it's less likely that a small investor will go to invest in Chicago, but still it may cause volatility. Now you will have to look at the cost. In Chicago, would they have to pay a higher cost? And RMB, actually, we are the home ground for Chicago. And Chicago is not as fast as us. we have more information about RMB here, so we don't have to be worried. No place in the world is like Hong Kong. Our financial market can make the most money. Mr. Leung, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by going away? Okay, for 1,000 and 2,000, what do you mean by that? For investors, no matter whether it's a small investor or institutional investors, if the position limit in Hong Kong is too conservative or too low, and if they resort to Chicago, then as the chairman said just now, they don't have to report their position to Hong Kong SFC. So if their position is high, and if we want to intervene, if we want to control our risk, we cannot do anything because the CME is not regulated by us.
So isn't there a limit on the trade volume in Hong Kong by the CME? Now, what about Mr. Cheung's question? For their contracts to be delivered in Hong Kong finally, is there anything that we can do about it? The settlement, well, yes, even in London or Singapore, they may have it. So it's just like Hong Kong providing services to overseas people to use our service. I think it's important for us to understand the matter. Now, Mr. Leung is saying that, first of all, we may have a smaller volume of trade. Second, less information for regulatory work in advance. And thirdly, for the risk involved in the exchange rate between Hong Kong dollars and renminbi, will still suffer from the consequences. Am I right about the 3 points made? Well, in this case, I have to think again. Mr. Chairman, of course, just now we were talking about relatively more extreme scenarios. When it comes to risk management, of course, we have to consider extreme scenarios as to whether they may happen. We don't know. Well, it is a simple point as far as the scrutiny is concerned. I think we should understand whether it should be 2,000 or not. I can be frank with you. Perhaps we can set it at 1,000. And then when the RMB pool is large enough, and irrespective of all the settlement needs, and Ms. Lai said that they can borrow, and then the broker may disallow it, even if you are interested. If the order cannot be executed, then there will be a default, and then that will be the end of it. I did consider all such matters, but I still have to consider the ultimate extreme position. And I have to consider the consequences. So I just wonder whether we should start smaller and come up with a lower limit. There will still be a limit, say, for example, at 1,000. Do we have the statistics as to the CME's physical delivery? They have just started. For how long? They only started in January. Oh, just in January. Perhaps they find that there is a business opportunity, judging from our experience. So 2,000 contracts, there isn't a mechanism. I think just a figure plucked from thin air, not on something scientific. Well, if they are interested in the futures, they can only deliver in Hong Kong unless they want to do it on the mainland. But of course, there are controls for the in and out. So they can only use the pool in Hong Kong for delivery. Now in Brazil, they may have some RMB, but then not enough. And again, in the USA, the RMB pool is not big enough. Remember that for the contracts that they have decided on, that will increase our risk. The rate may fluctuate. I'm getting a soft spot in my heart. Now, if they want to do it, and if they set it at 2,000, say, for example, they haven't got a limit. If we make it small, then the major investors will all go to their place, but the final settlement will take place in Hong Kong. We are making a fool of ourselves, so it's better if we get the business ourselves, and then we have the regulatory information. We can be on the guard, and then if we know that on the final 2 days, if they are still open positions, if they want to hold it until the end, then perhaps the Hong Kong MA can turn to grandfather for help, asking for $1,500 billion to prevent a major fluctuation. So at least we have an advance warning. So if we know nothing about the case and then they come suddenly to get the RMB, and if we haven't got ourselves ready, then it will be a big problem. It would also affect the exchange rate. MA's position will also be affected because Chicago is doing it as well. Yes, of course, finally it may affect us. So for the 2,000 contracts, do they have to be delivered or not? Now, if an investor is to hold out until the end, then the most you can keep would be 2,000. You can't have more than that. So maybe a few days before the settlement date, they may have delivery. No, they can just close it. So what is interested would be the difference. This is quite different from the last day, the final day. That is, either you get the US dollars or you need the RMB to settle it. Well, it seems that everybody agrees on the broad principles. I think when the SFC decided on the level, they were very cautious. If I don't use the word conservative, well, it means that while the market is operating, the MA and the SFC will be monitoring the matter closely. The regulatory bodies can also resort to contingency measures. You referred to extreme cases. We don't expect it to happen, but still the regulatory bodies have already considered such, and if I may put it this way, they have already got something in their pocket to counter it. So we have already been very cautious in coming up with this level, and I hope that members can support our proposal. Mr. Tong, you were not present, so I would like to share a very important point with you. Well, I'm not an expert here, Mr. Chairman. Now, if the administration thinks that the risk is so low that it is acceptable, then as a lawmaker, I don't think I should be vetoing it. Well, allow me to share the argument that was put forward to us a moment ago. Just now what Mr. Leung was saying is that currently 2,000 was the level set by Chicago, but then the settlement would take place in Hong Kong as well. If we fix it at 1,000, some traders will go to Chicago, and then we haven't got any regulatory information. I got all of it. I was still present at that time. It seems that nothing would come out of it, even if we carry on with the discussion. I think we accept the admin's explanation. I don't think it is a case beyond redemption, and I think everything will be put on record. If they think that they can bear the risk, then they should also bear the responsibility, because after all, they are the experts. I'm not an expert. I want to explore one other issue. I don't know whether there will be interactive consequence. Well, we are scrutinizing it, but then it has already been announced, and CME has followed suit and has pitched it at 2,000. I don't know what they are thinking on their side, but assuming that had we set it at 1,000, probably they would also make it at 1,000. I say this because, well, we are comparing and competing with each other. If you ask me if we start afresh, now Chicago only started in January, but but at the time they knew about our proposal because there was consultation and whatnot. So had we set it at 1,000, probably they would not have made it 2,000. But of course, the reality is that it is 2,000. They also make it 2,000. Now, if I scale back and make it 1,000, then probably what Mr. Leung has drawn our attention to may happen, and that would be to our disadvantage. That is, we haven't got the regulatory information and we cannot get ready, but we still have to bear the risk. So I would rather barring other characteristics, I think both are equally competitive. So I would rather have it here and have the regulatory information, and then we can get ourselves prepared for any events. Mr. Chang, assuming that on the day of settlement we have got 2,000 contracts, and then there is physical delivery. If the investor cannot deliver, now there will be 2,000 contracts of RMB. So who would they turn to settle the 2,000 contracts? Well, other than the RMB futures, there is also the spot market. And in fact, lines have already been created with some local banks, and they can exchange for RMB instantly. So it's only a matter of an exchange of two kinds of foreign currencies. You give out US and then you get RMB in return. So they deliver the RMB and they get US dollars in return. If you can't deliver it, either the exchange can make use of the bank lines. Do you have that much? So they will be watching it. They will be watching the spot market as well as the futures market. If they need the RMB, then they would be monitoring it all the time and be thinking of the lines established with the banks and not just with one bank. Well, if there isn't enough RMB for delivery, other foreign currencies can be used to satisfy it. So the contract can be written in such a way. Yes, that's what is being written. This is to safeguard the market as well as the exchange. So the exchange won't collapse, won't go into default if there isn't sufficient RMB. But then that investor would default because he can't deliver sufficient RMB to the exchange. So it's a matter of the difference. Not really the whole amount, is really the difference in the exchange rate. If you can't resolve it, it may jeopardize the financial security of our national government. Well, it's a blind fight for $720 billion. But it will affect our operation. But then this is the pool in Hong Kong. This is the RMB pool in Hong Kong. If there is a fierce fight for the RMB in Hong Kong, will that affect the national exchange rate or the worldwide exchange rate? Of course it will. Singapore will be sending all the RMB over to Hong Kong, and they're going to make a lot of profit. Are there other questions? If not, now, if anybody... sorry, we still have to go through the cross scrutiny. Let's spend under the period of time. Maybe we'll require a few minutes to go through the clauses. Let's take a look at the marked up copy. So, Ms. Chair, so we need to look at the different clauses, Ms. Chair. Well, in fact, it is a very simple amendment, if I may say so. So just adding 5 figures. Let's go through the different pages. Sorry, I haven't got a marked up copy. Let's supply one to Ms. Chair.
我哋嗰個文件咧就係6。
So our paper is CB bracket 1 601 12 to 13 bracket 01. Can I ask Mr. Leung to walk through the clauses, Mr. Chairman? Well, for this rule, there are two schedules. Schedule 1 is about futures contracts. That's about the prescribed limit and the reporting level. So we want to add two types of futures contracts to Schedule 1 in relation to their prescribed limit as well as the reporting level. So for Schedule 1, we have got the existing products of the exchange. So I will invite you to turn to the last page. That is page 4 of the English version. If you look at items 12 and 13, item 12, HSI Volatility Index Futures Contract. Now there are two figures here. First of all, 10,000 open contracts. Now this is the marked up copy. 10,000 would be the prescribed limit. Yes, I can see it because you see it on the left hand side. So for the HSI Volatility Index Futures Contract, we would like to prescribe the limit to say 10,000 open contracts, and then next to it is the reporting level, and it's 1,000. If any investors holding 1,000 open contracts, it has to be reported. And then in item 13, which has caused a lot of discussion, and that's the US dollar against RMB Hong Kong futures contract. The figure is 8,000. Now for the last 5 trading days, the limit would be 2,000. So there's about a change in the prescribed limit.
As for the reporting level, is the figure next to it. That is 500. That is, if you hold 500 contracts, then you have to report to the SFC or the MA. So the amendment is just the addition of provision 12 and 13, or item 12 and 13. I want to ask a technical question. Now for item 13 is called US dollar versus RMB Hong Kong futures contract. And just now we talked about it, and we knew it's about delivery. But here, it hasn't mentioned whether it will be closed. That is, if you just if you do not close it, then you'll still be subject to this restriction. That is, here under 13, is there a legal definition? We know that there's only one type in the market, and this is the type to be delivered. For Schedule 1, it actually sets out the products that can be traded at the exchange. So it's about physical delivery. So for Schedule 1, it's definitely under the exchange. So for 13, there's only one type. That is the type to be delivered. So in the future, if there's another type, that will be added. So if it's open, then we will have to add 14 in the future. Yes, I understand now. I just want to play safe. Members, any other questions? If not, I would like to let you know our future timetable. So we will not hold another meeting. Reporting to the House Committee is the 15th of March. If anyone wants to make amendment, the deadline is the 20th of March. That is, if you want to propose any amendments, deadline is the 20th of March. Reporting to the House Committee the 15th of March. Any other business, members? No? How about government representatives? No? Then we can conclude the meeting today. Thank you. We will make a report.